Welcome to day 2 of Launch Week. And today we have a real treat for you. We have a legend of the developer community, James Governor from RedMonk. Welcome, James.
Thanks, Dan. I think legend might be overstating it, but certainly spend a lot of time with developers trying to understand what they're up to. So yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here.
We will see over the next couple of minutes just how legendary you actually are. But we're going to dive straight in. Look, we live in interesting times in software development and releasing of software. There's some great stuff happening. We see this explosion of new applications because of AI. But there's also some fundamental stuff still broken. In fact, we see companies pushing out software that sometimes doesn't work. In fact, we see companies pushing out software that they regret pushing out. So why is it that the software release process is still broken?
I mean, this is I guess the $3 trillion question, Dan. The truth is, change is hard, and getting things right is hard. We live in an era where, sure, there are companies that create and provide incredible digital experiences, and our expectations are therefore high. What's interesting is some of those companies with those great digital experiences, sometimes they ship software that's not so great. Software companies sometimes make those mistakes. But yeah, undoubtedly, if we look at builds, now we imagine, of course, everyone has automated builds. It's 2024. This is the world we're living in. If you go into software organizations today, there are still manual builds happening. So change takes time. We're sort of nearly 20 years into the DevOps revolution, and I can still go to an enterprise customer. I can still go to a conference and do a DevOps 101 talk, and people will be excited to go there because nobody has made it all the way there. And of course, look, we've got different environments. Some are a little bit older, but the environment is just extremely complicated, and the environments are extremely complicated. And it's hard to get everyone there. Things are never going to be perfect, which is good news because otherwise we'd all be out of a job, I think.
So we spend a lot of time as an industry thinking about how we get the code from the laptop to the server, but we don't spend enough time thinking about how we get it from the server to the users. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, 100%. We should always be thinking about the user experience, but too often, actually, that's an afterthought. And I think the way you've articulated it really makes sense. That the most important thing is, are we getting the right experience to the right user at the right time? How do they feel about it? And is it a great experience? And if it's not, then we're going to be challenged because, we've had software eating the world. Now perhaps it's AI eating software. But the truth remains, we've got pretty high expectations. We want that mean time to dopamine. We don't want experiences that are broken. And yeah, we want something that feels good for us. And too often, companies are not spending enough time on that. They think, oh, okay, this is good enough. We'll ship it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about this kind of CrowdStrike moment. Look, I
Yeah.
think you talked about great software companies. I think of CrowdStrike as a great software company.
Mhm.
And they rolled something out and it caused a global outage. And, I think they've dealt with it extremely well since then. But the fallout and the cost of bad releases can be very high. So do people understand what the potential fallout of bad software is?
Well, I mean, we hope it's an industry-changing moment. If we think about security, clearly, security breaches can cause huge. Well, they can certainly cause problems to share prices, but over time can change revenues and so on. And I think software releases are no different. So we've had the CrowdStrike example, but another company that's been in the news recently is Sonos. So Sonos is a byword for a great experience. You know that you're going to be going around the house, enjoying your music, everything is great. But they shipped a change which, for a lot of users, broke the experience. So even a company that we think of as a byword for a great digital experience in the modern era can get things wrong. Now, it's pretty clear that things like canarying, blue-green deployments, feature flags are not being used across the software delivery lifecycle at enterprises, at software companies, at consumer electronic companies, and frankly, they need to be. I mean, it's hard to put an exact dollar figure on this, but look, there is no doubt that from CrowdStrike's perspective, and also the perspective of its customers, who were in some cases, airlines, that were unable to get their passengers from A to B. And this is an environment where in the US at least, There are now new legislation that there will be costs associated with that. The fact is, as humans, we're all always, and perhaps as Brits, you and I mean, I'm sort of somewhere in between, but I know that English people are very willing to complain about things. One thing I noticed that was really interesting about the London Underground was when they stopped just reporting on failures on the lines, but started reporting on what they were doing well. So instead of turning up and finding out that the circle line was not running, you would find out that, oh, actually, most of the lines are going well. And I think a lot of this is psychological. But yeah, clearly, I think CrowdStrike was a bit of a wake up call when you've got a software company breaking the experience for so many of its customers, and then that breaks the experience for their customers, whether they're in banking, trying to get on a plane. I think one of the amazing stories to me was, I think it was one of the airlines in India was like handwriting people's boarding passes. Certainly for me, that doesn't sound a particularly great experience. And so yeah, I mean, much like we've had security issues that have made us really take a step back and say, hang on a second, we need to get a handle on this. CrowdStrike, definitely from a user experience perspective, it became very, very clear. You know, we were naming airlines that had challenges. And, you know, that's certainly not good if you're one of those airlines. But yeah, it's more clear than ever today, here at the end of 2024, that yes, software release management is not something that is adjacent to the business. It indeed is the business, and I think organizations really need to get on board with better processes, better tools, and really making sure that their engineers and their engineering teams are set up so that they don't have these sorts of problems. If you can't do a rollback, you shouldn't be making a change. Like, if you can't ship software on a Friday afternoon, what are you doing, right? You know, you're only going to work 4 days a week. Like, any organization should be confident because of the processes they put in place, because of the testing they've got in place, because of that culture and the tools that they've got, that they can ship software on any day. If there is a problem, they can roll it back. And before they ship it, they're testing it darkly. They are testing in production. So we've got a set of disciplines. People are better be sticking to them because, yeah, if you break experiences for users, they won't always come back.
Well, it's interesting you talk about this kind of circle line experience there. So when you release software, there's good stuff that happens and there's bad stuff that happens. So goodies and baddies, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that companies understand the goodies and baddies of software releases?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, what we see when we talk to organizations that are delivering software, they don't always understand what good is. They don't always have as good a feedback loop as they should. We believe that AI is likely to exacerbate this. Definitely the importance of understanding what good is, that grows all the time. But yeah, I mean, we talked about the primacy of the user. That's not something that organizations are always thinking about. And it does need to be front and center. So we do need to start thinking about, well, how do we measure that user experience? How do we know how it actually feels for the user? That the idea of releasing software, if you don't include a feedback loop, then you don't, in fact, know what you're doing and you don't understand that user experience. And yeah, that's where you can run into problems.
You know, you and I were talking about software is eating the world and every company is becoming a software company. And I think Jensen Huang added to that, you know, and all software is going to be developed by AI. So this proliferation of software, this joyous experience of every company becoming a software company. But my reflection on that is if that's the case, then every CEO, every CTO, every leader needs to understand software releasing. Because software releasing is ultimately how your users are going to experience your software. And if your company is a software company, it's how your company is going to be experienced by the world. And therefore, actually, the software release practices is no longer some small domain in the corner in a little cupboard. It actually is a core principle that should be all the way up, everybody looking at and thinking about. Would you agree with that?
100%, but we've got a long way to go. You know, in many organizations, certainly, you know, look, I live in London. If I go to the banks and meet their boards and talk to them about what is possible with AI, they honestly don't, you know, with the greatest respect, have a clue. And certainly them really having an understanding of the critical importance of effective software delivery, it's not generally a board level concern. or if it is, they don't necessarily have the skills in order to ensure or ask the right questions and ensure that their IT departments and their software engineering organizations have better processes. So it definitely needs to be up leveled from the top down. From the bottom up, yeah, there are still challenges there too. I mean, some people still think it's not my job. They remember the days of, oh, I could hand off quality to another team. But I mean, if we think about Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance, quality is not something that you drop on top of the Christmas tree like baubles. Quality has to be the core of where the Christmas tree has grown from. And I think that's what we're talking about, quality. Organizations need to focus on quality. And yeah, we've definitely got work to do. Should the board be thinking about it? Should the CEO be thinking about it? Absolutely. But I think as an industry, we've got work to do to make people understand that importance. But I think it is becoming clearer all the time.
Well, what are some of those best practices that we can kind of codify maybe around process, tools, culture? Maybe you can share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one is metrics. Do we understand and we've got frameworks for this, useful frameworks, the space framework or the Dora framework. I think with Dora, how often are we deploying software? What is our mean time to recover? These are common metrics that we can begin to use to understand our capabilities in delivering software as hopefully elite performers. So definitely have a set of metrics that we are measuring our teams with. I think we really do need to think about collaboration because this is change management. How are teams working together? How do we encourage them to work more effectively? So yeah, Amazon byword for effective software delivery. That certainly, I mean, Amazon. Look, well, apart from the occasional problem with US East, generally we expect that Amazon is not going to fall over, right? And that's partly because of the work they've done in social rather than technical change. And one of the things they did is look, they have one box is those one pizza teams. Think about one box. Anything that we roll out, we're going to roll out to one box before we think about the cell, before we think about the region, before we think about the availability zone. And certainly from their perspective, they began to understand what they needed to do was to encourage people. What's the carrot that everybody would use a pipeline? Because everybody should be thinking about end-to-end integration beyond unit testing. They should be thinking about those pipelines. And so they literally had a social initiative where engineering teams would say, we're on the pipeline. And I think that social change was so important to Amazon becoming more effective. So you've got the metrics, you've got the social changes, and then of course you've got to think about what are the tools, products that we've got in place in order to deliver on this. So yeah, I think that it's always an interbalance. I mean, we talk about the socio-technical system. It's a balance between the platform and the people that enables us to become more effective. And I think getting that right and ensuring that we do have a program of change management to do that, that's where we see organizations that are being successful. But yeah, metrics, I guess the other one for me, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, absolutely tying together your observability information about how a system is performing, that needs to be starting right when you begin to build the application. Developers need to be thinking about, is this application going to be observable? What will the logs look like? Write a love letter to myself, right? Because in 2 years' time, there's going to be a call, the application's fallen over, I'm in bed in the middle of the night, I've been paged, I better have a log that tells me how to fix it, because if not for someone else, for myself. Because I don't know about you, we forget the problems that we've solved. So yeah, good logs, and absolutely developers taking responsibility, as well as those engineering managers. I think those would be some of the best practices I would point to.
So many great gems in there, but this idea that we forget the problems that we've solved. Progressive delivery is a solved problem for the industry. We know how to do progressive delivery. Of course, you should deliver software first to a subset of users or a subset of machines or a subset of regions, or one box in the Amazon example you shared earlier. So we know this to be true. Why isn't everyone progressively releasing software?
With all of these things, changes is hard. It would be great if we lived in this once and future state. But we all have legacy. If we're an enterprise, we probably got some systems, and you look at the world of mainframes, for example, they are literally running the transactions. I mentioned airlines. Well, the truth is that the booking systems for airlines are still running on mainframes. And TPF it's a very complicated system. It's not one that's super amenable to the kinds of changes we're describing. We look at SAP. If I buy a can of Coke, if I buy a pair of Nikes, if I buy any of the things that I buy in the grocery store from a consumer packaged goods company, chances are high it's touching an SAP backend. Well, ABAP, which is their transaction system, really isn't designed for the sorts of rapid iterations that so much of the rest of the software world is. So I don't think that we can sort of, I don't think we can entirely say, why are we not all doing this? Change is hard. DevOps, nearly 20 years old, we're still not there yet. Um, and I think it's my job and your company's job to help people understand how they can become more effective. There are better practices. There are organizations living in the future. So how do we get there? And I like to be I like to have some empathy actually for enterprises and other organizations that look around and they're like, I think a great example is Netflix, right? So microservices, and Netflix is so amazing at writing software. We could never be like that. Netflix used to be just a huge monolithic Java tarball. It was just a mess. But they did the disciplined work of decoupling services so that they could begin to move more quickly, ship more frequently, and so on. So yeah, I think that I think we have to be a little bit kind to ourselves in 2024, Dan.
You and I both believe that most software experiences are going to have some incorporation of Gen AI in them. Does that open up a new territory of risks with these applications?
100%. Maybe more than that. Maybe, I mean, if you could have more than 100%, I'd say 1,000%. Yeah, I mean, clearly, there are new attack vectors. If we think about things like prompt injection, and it's one thing to say, okay, we can start fooling the model. But of course, we're not separating models from enterprise application services. We want them to work alongside. The good news is we're going to be doing retrieval augmented generation. We're going to be doing things like RAG. We are going to start querying those backend services. We're going to start introducing automation that can tie into those backend services. Just this week, or just at the moment, we've had Claude shipping features so that you can begin to do automation on your local machine. Well, if you can do automation on your local machine and you can tie into those backend services and APIs, and you've got that prompt injection vector as a potential threat, yeah, absolutely. There are all sorts of new threats that we need to think about when we're rolling out software. And that doesn't even begin to we've been in a cut and paste world of software development for quite a while. And AI kind of adds to that. What you can't do is just assume that anything that is generated by ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever else is going to be fine. Hey, I'm using Cursor, it feels good. But when you roll that out, there could be problems. So how do we roll it back if there is a problem? How do we test it in production? How can we launch something darkly? These are real concerns. And yeah, there's no doubt that AI, generating code is super easy. Shipping code that we can trust and rely on and that creates a great experience for our users, that's the bit that's hard.
It's funny. I'll just reflect a little bit when you said that. It's almost like what's new is old. And yes, we have all these new capabilities. And yes, because of the non-deterministic nature of AI, that we don't quite know what the experience is going to look like until we start using them. It's even more the case that the core principles of how you release software those good old-fashioned principles come into practice once again, which is, progressively release your software, which is make sure you don't move to the next stage until you have those unit tests done, which is make sure you have the ability to roll back if you notice users are having a bad experience. I heard of one experience recently, which is the chat experience of a car company. And it was one of the consumers was asking a question about the warranty and the service of the car. And the chat experience ended up recommending an alternate brand because it had a better service policy. So, that that's what can happen. It's just so just because it's AI doesn't mean it's good. And you need that ability to roll back when things go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes we're a little bit too hesitant about that. There is an expectation that I put it this way. I think you're exactly right that some of those disciplines are super important. I think one of the opportunities that we've got in industry today is frankly the core concepts that standing on the shoulders of giants that worked out, CI/CD, that really made testing, the primacy of testing in terms of what we were doing, the transition to agile, all of these sorts of things absolutely have that role to play. I think what's different or what has changed in the last 15, 20 years is there are things like abundance, with cloud. Remember when we used to live in a world of permission, we had to ask, we need to get a server, we need to get a network, we need to get a database, and you might literally be waiting months in order that IT was going to respond to you. Now we've got the cloud, and it's like, well, hang on a minute. We could spin up one instance, we could spin up 1,000 instances, we could spin up many instances. Hang on a second, we could do experimentation. If we're going to offer a service to an end user, maybe we could take one cohort of end users that would, try one thing, another would try other. Blue-green deployments used to be something very expensive because you would have to have two sets of infrastructure in order to do that. Now, it can be as easily as, perhaps changing that feature flag. We've got the routing infrastructure in place. So I think abundance is far, far ahead of where it was. Automation, if we think about our ability to automate the cloud environments, that's something that's very, very different. And that allows for an alignment that we honestly previously didn't have. So I think the thing about everyone being a software company is quite honestly, we've got these opportunities that we just didn't have previously because of the core underpinnings, the sort of the mega trends that enable us to do, yes, progressive delivery, where we're getting the right experience to the right user at the right time.
Well, if you're on an AI application team, you're excited about this new capability you're about to ship, what should some of the things be going through your mind? Is there a checklist of things that you think best practices around releasing this new AI feature or this new AI capability?
Well, Dan, I think you've said it really well. The basics are there. We need to be able to do all of the things that we would have expected. Like if you are not in a position that you can do a rollback if something goes wrong, then Houston, we have a problem. In Houston, we have a problem that comes from the space race. Pretty clearly, if you were going to be flying a rocket, you don't really get a chance for a rollback. Hopefully we're not at that level of mission criticality, but of course we are. We are dealing with mission critical systems, and if we start using AI with them, and I think that's why organizations have been justifiably cautious. So what are the set of the disciplines are the same. I would say in terms of testing, we just need to be more thorough than we've ever been before we roll things out into production. And I think with AI, it's also, it's not just is it a breaking change, but what's the experience like? To your point, what if the AI is going to start recommending that you buy someone else's car? Now, have you done sufficient testing? That's not a prompt injection, but that's an area where, frankly, we probably do need prompting teams like the old QA teams. Developers will know some of the questions, but they won't know all of the questions. My son is 19. He's building an application himself using Cursor right now. His thing was like, well, maybe I could work with an AI. His interest is for whatever reason, he likes building hardware, he likes building PCs. Let's use an AI to do that. It turns out the error handling and tracking the AI and the answers it gives is a big part of what you need to do. So there are definitely a new set of disciplines, but I think they're enabled and underpinned by all of the things that we've done in IT going, over these past sort of 15 years, and the kinds of things that effective organizations are doing and that we're trying to document every day.
You're very forgiving of the complex tapestry of the IT organizations or the application debt, maybe of let's say a company that's a slightly, older or more mature company.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean you're less forgiving of newer companies, maybe new companies like a new AI company, as an example? So new AI company, surely they should be following all of these practices.
Well, I mean, we've got the acronym YOLO, right? You only live once. And in a market as competitive as the one we're in, people are going to cut corners, and they're going to think, well, actually, I want that user to have the mean time to dopamine more than I do worry about the sort of compliance or some of those issues. I mean, here's the thing. I didn't even really talk about that from an enterprise perspective. Sometimes they've got regulatory concerns where they need to report to regulators based on how they develop software. And it's really not so long ago that they would literally be like, take a screenshot of every change and put it in a PDF document so that you can share it with us, the regulator. That makes things awfully hard for an enterprise organization. If you are an AI startup south of market, you're probably not, you just don't have those concerns. YOLO, I realize that Facebook have sort of changed the mantra, but move fast and break things. You're just really focusing on getting as many customers as you can as quickly as possible, and you'll sort of worry about the damage later. And frankly, not everything about this is good. But that's VC funded businesses. They should be able to have software discipline. They should be able to do a rollback. But look, if just look at companies like Airbnb or Uber, they are bywords for companies that have successfully changed business processes across the board, and they didn't get there by being super careful. I think that we should be careful. I think AI is particularly an area where it makes sense to be careful. But yeah, the incentives are so high to move quickly. Yeah, we definitely see corners being cut.
Yeah, no, at LaunchDarkly, we absolutely want to keep that speed going, but we want to keep the speed going and have the ability to roll back in case you get things wrong. It's almost like
Mhm.
acknowledging the fact that things will go wrong. This is what happens with software. But also then, given that we know that, let's have the ability to roll things back very gracefully so we can start the cycle again. That's kind of our mental model.
Yeah, I mean, look, an effective rollback, it's where we started the call, right? If we think about CrowdStrike, if we think about Sonos, if there's one critical thing, and we even see this, we see this in the world of Kubernetes, you have to be able to roll something back. I mean, and basically you shouldn't ship software if you can't roll it back, if it's a breaking change or it ruins things for the user. If there's one simple rule, it's probably that, or maybe two. A, get good, be able to ship software on a Friday, and B, if you do ship software on a Friday afternoon, you'd better be able to roll it back. So that's the basics.
Now, you've been following LaunchDarkly for a little while, and thank you for joining us yesterday as we keynoted. And we introduced to the world this concept of guarded releases, this idea that you could measure the release as it progresses and set thresholds on performance and not allow it to progress to that next stage unless it's met some of those characteristics that we like and enjoy, bringing that error monitoring right there into the release process. Love to get your reactions to that. You think that's going to be important for the industry?
Well, I honestly think it's super exciting. So I mentioned I've used this phrase progressive delivery. The truth is that without, and I go back to this notion of the feedback loop, without a really effective feedback loop so that we can understand an experience, we can't really do progressive delivery. We need to understand what the experience is going to be like for the end user. And I think tying that together with metrics, I mean, certainly over the years, some of the most compelling illustrations I've seen from organizations that are working really effectively in terms of their product releases is they really understand that observability and release management, or observability and feature flags, those go together with like peanut butter and chocolate, right? They are absolutely things that should be well integrated. And if you can automate that, things begin to become very effective. Like if we're going to be doing canarying, we want to be able to set some thresholds and understand what that looks like. We do want to be able to say, okay, we're going to roll it out to 1% of the Kubernetes fleet, not the entire 99%. And we want to monitor that in flight before we roll it out more broadly. And so the idea that we can truly have a cohort, that might be a cohort of users, or that might be a cohort of machines, before we roll it out more broadly and have really good insights into that, that is exactly what we need. Because look, here's the reason it's exciting. And I don't want to be like, I'm excited about your product, but what I am excited about is, in order to drive organizational change and cultural change to write better software, we need better platforms. And I think sometimes with the DevOps movement, we saw this a lot where people say, oh, DevOps is a culture change. You can't buy DevOps. That may be true, but also trying to do DevOps, if you don't have amazing automation tools, it's not going to happen, right? Chef and Puppet played a really important role in making DevOps a thing. The idea that Git and the use of GitHub didn't change how software was delivered and how software teams work together is just asinine. The truth is that a powerful platform, a well-integrated platform, one that packages workflows, that can drive the culture change that's needed in order to make organizations more effective. So if I've got more effective automation and I can set those kinds of thresholds and have the data tied into what I'm doing in terms of releases, yeah, that's good news. So, do more of that, please, Dan. It makes sense to me.
Well, James, as promised, it was a legendary discussion. Really enjoyed hanging out with you, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much. It's been my pleasure.